Welcome to Glass Houses, a Billy Joel podcast. I'm Michael Grosvenor.
And I'm Jack Fernino. Join us as we dig deep into Billy Joel's songs and history and what his music has meant to us.
Almost a decade after the breakout hit album The Stranger, the Billy Joel machine was showing some signs of wear. That strain was evident on his 1986 album, The Bridge.
After a string of multi-platinum, chart-topping, and award-winning records, Billy was worn out and wanted to be home with his family instead of back in the studio.
Meanwhile, relationships were strained between his longtime band members after years and years in and out of tour buses and recording studios.
All this was weighing on Billy and the band as they headed back in to record their follow-up to An Innocent Man. That album felt light and breezy and was stacked with bright and bouncy pop hits. By contrast, The Bridge would sound more labored and strained and would explore more turbulent themes.
But even one of Billy's least regarded albums still contains flashes of brilliance that are worth seeking out. On one hand, the record sounds dated and locked in the 80s, but on the other, it's like a time capsule to the pop music of that decade.
The album is also dotted with guests that personify the era in which it was recorded, while also tracing the roots of Joel's career and musical influences.
Join us as we dive deep into Billy Joel's 1986 album, The Bridge.
A while ago, I posited the idea that The Bridge was the Street Life Serenade of the 80s. Listening back on this, giving it the close listen for this episode, I stand by that statement, but there is a lot more to say about this one than I thought I was going to come up with. And that's remarkably different, I would say, than what we heard on Street Life Serenade.
That always seems to happen with us, where ultimately end up uncovering so much more than meets the eye at face value.
Well, you know, it's funny. I mentioned that Marx Brothers podcast a few episodes back, and, you know, those guys are such experts that they talk a little trash on a couple of the later films, and every once in a while they stop and they're like, you know, we can only say this because we've watched these movies that many times. Like, if you sat us down in a theater with people watching it for the first time, they're going to laugh, we're going to laugh, we're going to have a great time. You know, it's the fact that people like you and I have worn out these records. We sort of get to be critical, but then when we go back and listen to them again, they sound a little better when you give them that close listen.
I appreciate all of the elements, both musically and personally, that went into this one. Certainly early on when this album came out, I was unaware of. There's a lot wrapped around this era and this album in particular that gives me a new appreciation for, you know, ultimately being able to put this thing out under some stressful personal circumstances.
And we'll get into all that soon. But first, let's dip into the old mailbag. And by mailbag, I mean Gmail.
We don't get too many letters anymore.
It's like The Simpsons with Homer standing over the trash can. Bills, bills, bills. This first one comes from Andrew Lubman. He writes, "Hi guys, love the podcast, although admittedly there are many episodes I still have to catch up on. Fellow member of the Billy Joel Completely Retold group on Facebook. Pretty sure you guys are on there as well. I think that's how I heard about the podcast. Just wanted to chime in on a few things regarding the most recent episode, which was live in Houston." And Andrew brings up something that a bunch of other people were kind enough to fill us in on, but he gives a little more detail, so we're going to include this here. He says, "I'm sure a number of people will comment on this first thing. The context for Billy's Iranian salute is that earlier in November 1979, a group of Iranian college students went to the American embassy and took 52 Americans as hostages. They were kept hostage for over a year. It was known as the Iran hostage crisis, so Billy's gesture wasn't random. I was at the Madison Square Garden show on the Glass Houses tour, June 1980. I remember they did the same intro for My Life, and later on many other tours as well. I don't think it's a specific piece of music. I think they're just noodling around. Speaking as a professional musician myself, I think they did it as a fun way and perhaps a surprise way to get into a song that had been all over the radio. The song is in the key of D major, but they're noodling around in D minor to, quote, throw the audience off the trail, perhaps. The same D octave pattern that starts the song off on the record works underneath this D minor improv. As an aside, I can hear how there's a definite possibility that the intro riff to Pressure may have been born from this same D minor noodling. By the way, I was also at the Live from Long Island show, as well as the Live from Yankee Stadium concert. This guy gets into it. Here we go. Samplers weren't really a thing yet when Glass Houses was being recorded. There was the Fairlight CMI, which came out that same year, but was very expensive and wasn't in wide use. I believe the one that Billy used on Nylon Curtain, in the solo section of Pressure, for example, was the emulator from the company E-Mu, so EMU Systems, which didn't come out until 1981. Regarding Billy specifically mentioning that the girl's name is Lena when he introduces the song might be for clarification. Lena was not a common name, at least not to my ears at the time, so perhaps he felt that he needed to mention it so that people wouldn't be thinking, what is he saying here? The synthesizer that is seen in the All for Lena promo film is an Oberheim OBX sitting on top of the Yamaha CP80 piano. I had assumed that the solo was played on the Mini Moog. The OBX could certainly get that same sound. Normally, I would make a point of saying that just because you see it in the video doesn't mean that's what was used on the record. However, if your hunch was correct, that the video was shot at A&R, where the album was recorded, then there is a greater likelihood that that's true. In either case, Mini Moog or OBX, the solo is made up of 3 tracks of synth. Each track contains a monophonic line, much like if Billy recorded 3 vocal harmony parts, each on its own track. I remember the roadies coming out to do the finger snaps on Stiletto when I saw him on the Glass Houses tour. They also came out and set up a little table with a red and white checkered tablecloth for scenes. I think they also came out and did the rhythmic clapping during the piano solo in Don't Ask Me Why. Billy played Root Beer Rag when I saw him on that Glass Houses show. As I mentioned, I'm a professional musician. If you have a moment, I'd love you to check out some of my videos, under the name All You Need Is Lub on YouTube. So that's All You Need Is L-U-B, be like boy, on YouTube. Most of my videos are note-for-note recreations of Beatles songs. I'm playing and singing all the parts using real instruments, no MIDI or samples. However, I also have a video of New York State of Mind. In that one, I wasn't trying to recreate the sound of the studio version, but I did have fun with my video software, adding some special guest accompaniments. All right, Andrew, thank you for your email. I feel like you had a lot saved up there, and the payoff was well worth it. I love the synth chat. I guess I had an inkling that these were layered synths because they would have been monophonic, and B, if you listen close, you realize that there's a lot going on there. But good work on dissecting it and helping us zero in on the Oberheim. Pretty
Yeah,
cool.
absolutely. And I went back and watched the video after this email, and sure enough, now I can't unsee it. I do see the Oberheim logo on the keyboard, and for some reason, it was escaping my eyes the other times. And just for a little clarification, it's actually not A&R that those videos were filmed. It was the 52nd Street videos that were done at A&R. The Glass Houses videos, aside from sometimes a fantasy, were filmed in essentially a lighting warehouse, I believe connected to Steve Cohen. He had his own lighting company around this time, and I believe this was basically just the storage warehouse where gear was kept.
That would explain why it's so bare bones, certainly.
And he's credited as the director.
Well, that makes sense then.
What I kind of wonder is if these videos were just also kind of pre-production for the tour and they decided to film a couple.
I mean, that wouldn't have been the lights, though, because the lights are really low. It wouldn't have been like a tech thing.
Like more musical rehearsal.
Put it on a list of things to ask Billy.
Or Steve Cohen if we get him. And this next one's from friend of the show, Rick Heitmeyer, who has written to us a few times in the past. He says, "Hi guys, great podcast on the Houston 79 concert. Lots of good discussion and banter. Plus, you brought up some good points about the interaction between the band. Your podcast is solid, and I've enjoyed it since you started. Thanks for taking the time to do it. I grew up in Michigan, and my first Billy Joel concert was February 22nd, 1990, at the Palace. Great show. One of the best shows I saw was 93 at the Rosemont Horizon in Chicago. It was right around the time that he and Christy split, and if you listened close to the banter, he hinted at something like that. I had heard that at the time, he hadn't really kept My Life in the set regularly, and after a reference to marriage, he broke it out. Anyway, a solid show. Saw him in 98 again at the Palace, front row, but that's a story for another day. That's the night I caught Lib's drumstick. I mouthed to him, 'Liberty, throw me a drumstick,' and he mouthed back, 'You better catch it,' and I did. He later signed a note on his letterhead, 'You caught it, you keep it.' Fun night." The original reason I thought I would send you this note is that the Iranian hostage crisis started on November 4th, 1979. So I've always thought the Iranian salute was aimed at Iran from having our people held hostage. I don't think he was flipping off the crowd. He was telling Iran what it is. Anyway, I enjoy the podcast and look forward to them. I like the length and the frequency. Keep up the awesome work, and really, don't take any shit from anybody. Cheers, Rick.
It's so funny. We were like, I wonder what this Iranian thing was. And people just, I love it though, but people just came out of the woodwork very politely. But we got like 20 messages like,
well, I'm just fortunate that we've got the great group of listeners that if we get something wrong or we miss something, people are cool. They let us know, but they're cool about it. Nobody has once come to us and be like, you guys suck, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah. Hey, dumbass. Read a history book,
Right.
Yeah. And it's cool because, like I said, I think we get the opportunity to put a lot of stuff on the record, so to speak. And when people fill us in on stuff like that, the community's part of that as well. Let's jump into the bridge.
1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4.
So the reason I call it the Street Life Serenade of the 80s is because there's a lot of parallels in the production here. The big one is that he didn't want to make this record, nor did he want to make Street Life Serenade. He didn't feel he had the material. He wasn't in the mindset to do it. And even though this one features the core band, while Street Life Serenade had session players, they both share a sense of loneliness. And I think in this case comes from the turmoil that was going on in the band at the time. Even though, when I checked the liner notes for all the guests on here, the bulk of this record is just the core band. You have 3 big star guests, and then Big Man on Mulberry Street and Baby Grand featured some session players. But other than that, it's almost as pure as Glass Houses.
It is, but it feels so much less of a band than that record does. It's got a little bit more of a clinical sound, a little hard to pinpoint. And, as we would come to find out, this was when things were starting to splinter between the band as well. So it feels less cohesive in that respect, certainly.
Billy and Christy had just had Alexa. Billy really wasn't in the mood to go make music. He wanted to be home with his family. A big part of the reason why he didn't want to do this. And on top of that, just you could kind of tell he was struggling a bit to come up with material. He said that you could really see the seams on this one. As I'm listening to it, I've identified on my close listen a bunch of places where I can sort of really see exactly what he means, where something feels underdeveloped or something feels stitched together, things like that.
And going back to the pressure he was under, what a lot of people don't realize is when you're an artist of the success of a Billy Joel, it's a lot of pressure to keep that machine running. So often you just keep going despite really what is best for you personally and your feelings dictate.
What is this, the 4th album we've done? This is the 2nd time I've actually done the listen on vinyl. Let me tell you, this album actually sounds a lot better on record. There's a couple things that pop out a little more. It's a little more expansive than digital. There's one spot that I'll get to where there's a bit of a sonic difference that I think came with a remaster where they had a little bit of better technology to fix a stitch. But Michael, of course, I was like, ooh, let me bring my vinyl to the rodeo here, and Michael just shows up with 2 because he's a tough guy.
Two different versions.
Right.
In fact, I actually also have my cassette
and
here.
the cassette. Let me go dig out my my remastered CD somewhere.
What's fascinating about the cassette version, you don't see the entire album cover until you fold out the J card. So part of the painting on the cover is under the fold. So you don't see it all when you're looking at the front of it.
And that really screws with the painting because, I couldn't tell what it was for the longest time because I only ever saw it on CD and cassette. And I think you have to see the whole thing on 12-inch to really figure out what it is.
And so the 2 vinyl versions I have right now are, this is a sealed copy, original pressing, still with the hype sticker on it, which says, the new album from Billy Joel includes the hits Modern Woman from the motion picture Ruthless People, A Matter of Trust, and Baby Grand, a duet with Billy Joel and Ray Charles.
And that's pretty indicative of this album's characteristic. I said it before, I'll say it again. This is also like a survey of the 80s. This was all sorts of 80s pop. Now, I don't want to say the whitewashed big band, but you had this sort of watered down jazz, sort of really crystalline big band. You had the modern pop star. You had one of the old guys from the 60s that figured out how to sound relevant in the 80s. You had a pastiche of one of the biggest bands of the early 80s, late 70s. You had some smooth saxophone. You had some smooth guitar. You had a little dash of electronic drums.
Oh, yeah, it's all there. The second version of vinyl that I have was a reissue by Friday Music. They did a couple pressings starting in 2015. Of all the albums that they've reissued, this one looks the best. It's crystal clear. The painting, the typeface on the front and on the back, it's as sharp, if not sharper, than my original pressing. Usually when a reissue is done, they're not using the best source material to reproduce the album artwork. You get some generational loss, but the work they did on this is incredible.
That's a gatefold.
It's a gatefold, so instead of the inner sleeve, which has the lyrics and the photos being inside, it's on a gatefold here.
That's nice looking.
It looks really good, and again, with the front and back cover, very crisp, very clean, very sharp. It looks really great. They took a lot of care with it. On a personal note, I always loved the color scheme on the inside, using the light reddish pink with the gray theme. And one thing I like about this version, it is on blue vinyl.
Ooh, that's nice looking blue vinyl.
Yeah.
And it's opaque too, like you could see.
Yeah, it's opaque. Yeah,
oh, that's cool. That's cool.
Yeah, this is a fun one. They did a nice job with this reissue.
When did that come out?
I think Friday Music did 3 different runs of it. One on black vinyl in 2015. They did a blue vinyl, and then they did I think it was like an orange vinyl as well.
Have you listened to, if not an original pressing, like one of the pressings from the 80s?
I think the original, because I do have an open copy of the old pressing as well, and it's tough to beat. They just sound so great. Those originals were sourced from the master tapes. Mm-hmm. I don't know where the reissues are sourced from. It could be sourced from a digital master that's much more recent. For my money, you can't beat the original.
It occurred to me as I began doing my close listen how often he does AABB rhymes. And they're really not that inventive. Like, line 1 rhymes with line 2. Line 3 rhymes with line 4. And I was trying to go through other albums in my head to figure out how often he's done that. I think the one where he does not, the most significantly, I think, is The Entertainer. But he does it a lot. However, on this album, there's a lot of really cool sort of phonetic wordplay going on. There's a lot of interior rhymes, which make it more interesting. There's a lot of places where he just gets off really pleasing lyrics. At their best, they carry some weight, and they also have a great sense of craft and a great sort of sonorous quality to them that when you read them, you just enjoy how they read and you enjoy how he says them. But at the same time, there's places where it falls apart, even in the same song. And I think those are those seams that are showing.
You could tell there's spots where these were hard to write. Not that they're a challenging lyric, but his heart wasn't into it the whole time, it feels like.
Or it's just the fact that he hit some heights in other parts of the song. And, had he not hit those heights, he wouldn't have thrown his curve. We would have been kind of fine with it. He sort of vacillates between, that really great word crafting and songs with really interesting subject matter. Rarely do the two meet. And that sort of makes sense because sometimes you don't want the theme of your song or the message to be clouded by some, vocal acrobatics. But that's sort of the other thing that you hear come up on this record.
So the bridge was recorded between 1985 and 1986 and a couple studios. Largely it was done at the Power Station in New York, but it was also done at Chelsea Sound North, RCA Studios in New York City, and Evergreen Studios in Burbank, California. And it was released July 9th, 1986. And one thing to note that this is the final album to have the Family Productions logo. And when you think about it, Cold Spring Harbor came out in 1971. Here we are 15 years later. Artie Ripp is still making money on all those albums.
And, and that makes the final song all the more poignant.
The bridge was certified gold on October 8th, 1986, so 3 months after release. And it was also certified platinum on the same day. So 3 months, it sold 1 million copies. But get this, it sold another 1 million by April 6th, 1987. So it moved pretty quickly.
Yeah.
However, that was the last certification of this album. So between April of 1987 and 2021, not another 1 million have sold. And it's gone on to be one of Billy's lowest selling albums, certainly his lowest of the 80s. We had a total of 4 singles on the album. We had Modern Woman, which was released in May of 1986, which was also tied into the Ruthless People soundtrack, as we talked about. We had A Matter of Trust, which came out July 86, right around the time of the album's release. This Is the Time was released as a single in November of 1986. And you had Baby Grand released as a single of March 1987. And of the songs, as far as the Billboard Hot 100 goes, Modern Woman and A Matter of Trust were the 2 biggest singles, both peaking at number 10 on the Billboard Hot 100. This Is the Time peaked at number 18. However, it did go all the way to number 1 on the Billboard Adult Contemporary charts. And Baby Grand peaked at number 3 on the Billboard AC charts, but only peaked at number 75 on the Hot 100. Now, this is interesting. The album actually peaked at number 7 on the Billboard 200. He wasn't able to crack the top 5 with this one.
His first time in a while.
Yeah, after a big string of records, he missed it by a couple spots, and obviously he rallied back with Stormfront, which became a number 1 album. But we had a little bit of a dip here with The Bridge. Now, granted, to most people, a dip like that would be amazing.
7 would be a peak.
Right, exactly. But for Billy, it was certainly a dip nonetheless. Let's go through real quick the musicians and personnel on the record. Again, as Jack mentioned, it's largely the Lords here. We had David Brown on guitar, Russell Javers on rhythm guitar, Liberty DeVito on drums, Doug Stegmeyer on bass, Mark Rivera on tenor sax on 2 songs.
And alto on Temptation.
Additionally, we had Rob Mounsey, who did synthesizer on Running on Ice, orchestration on This Is the Time, Modern Woman, Big Man on Mulberry Street. Jeff Bova, synthesizer on Matter of Trust, Go to Silence, and the orchestration on Temptation. Ray Charles, obviously, piano and vocals on Baby Grand. Steve Winwood, Hammond B3 on Getting Closer. Don Parks, guitar on Baby Grand. John McCurry, guitarist on Getting Closer. Neil Steubenhouse, bass guitar on Baby Grand. Ron Carter, acoustic bass on Big Man on Mulberry Street. Neil Jason, bass guitar on Getting Closer. Vinnie Colaiuta, drums on Baby Grand. Jimmy Bralower, percussion on Modern Woman. Eddie Daniels, alto sax on Big Man on Mulberry Street. Michael Brecker, tenor sax on Mulberry. Ronnie Cuber, baritone sax on Big Man on Mulberry Street. Dave Bargeron, trombone on Mulberry Street. Marvin Stamm, trumpet on Mulberry Street. Alan Rubin, trumpet on Mulberry Street. And then you had Don Brooks, the harmonica player on Code of Silence. Patrick Williams did arrangements on Baby Grand. Philip Saiz, orchestration on Temptation. And Peter Hewlett on Running on Ice, singing background vocals. And lastly, we had Cyndi Lauper, harmony vocals on Code of Silence.
You know what's funny about this is that, as a kid, I knew who Ray Charles and Cyndi Lauper were, obviously. But, now that I'm looking at these, like, there's a lot of other legends on these. I think we've mentioned this before, but Vinnie Colaiuta is like a titan in the drum world. Yeah. Ron Carter, go back and listen to some Miles Davis if you don't know who Ron Carter was. And I think there was somebody else that really jumped
Neil
out.
Jason on bass.
Yeah, didn't we go through? I feel like we did this before. I didn't know who Neil Jason was, but you pointed out that he's a very prolific session player.
Yeah, he's a guy who's played on pretty much everything. He played bass on Getting Closer. Doug Stegmeyer wasn't in on that session. And he actually also played bass, I believe, on the session with Paul McCartney that Liberty was involved in. And on the production side, we had Phil Ramone producing, which was his last full-length album with Billy. Production coordinator was Joe D'Ambrosio. Engineer Jim Boyer. Associate engineers were Steve Boyer, David Dixon, Bradshaw Lee, and Fred Tenney. Tech support, Ricky Began, Peter Bergen, Mark Betts, Steve Buller. The album says it was actually digitally recorded at the Power Station, Chelsea Sound Studios, and RCA Studios. I did mention those studios. However, that's an interesting note that it was digitally recorded, which wasn't quite so common in '86.
And especially because we know that it was I guess An Innocent Man, from what we heard from Bradshaw Lee, was on tape because he was talking about having to bounce down all those tracks of vocals because they would be recording the harmonies and things like that one by one.
The original album was mastered by Ted Jensen, who mastered most of Billy's albums back then. And the design of the packaging was Mark Larson, and the cover painting was done by Brad Holland. The photography was done by Patrick Demarchier. I'm sure I got that wrong. But one thing that's interesting, I believe I read a story somewhere about the cover artwork. I believe there was a lawsuit involved between Billy, his team, and Brad Holland here. From what I recall, the original agreement that they had was that the artwork was licensed or summoned to do the album artwork, but There was no license to do merchandise beyond it. Posters, concert shirts, all those things that that image was reproduced on. I don't believe there was a deal on that. I don't know if they settled or what the end result was, but I think there was some litigation involved there.
And we have 2 reviews. First one here is from Anthony DeCurtis with Rolling Stone. You know, as much as it's common knowledge that Rolling Stone and a little more Robert Christgau, among many other critics, didn't like Billy, this review is not horrible, especially when even we're admitting that it's not his strongest album. It's not glowing, but it's pretty even keeled.
I think it gives them a little more fair shake than some of the others.
Yeah, for sure. So we have, here we go. On the Bridge, his first LP of new material in 3 years, Billy Joel gracefully rounds off the latest and richest phase of his tempestuous career. The album essentially forms a trilogy with 1982's outward-looking The Nylon Curtain and 1983's backward-looking An Innocent Man, offering a modest yet moving portrait of a mature man battling the urban strains of the 80s in search of both a separate peace and a sense of connection. It's tempting to read the newfound comfort Joel displays on the Bridge in personal terms. This is, after all, his first album since his marriage to Christy Brinkley and the birth of their child. His defensive cockiness has softened into a much more appealing confidence, and he's abandoned the ambitious concepts he's relied on to unify past LPs. The danger of a biographical reading of The Bridge, however, is that Joel has historically been the least self-revealing of songwriters, a fact that's caused him no end of problems with critics. Whereas most literate rock and roll trades on the romantic illusion of an artist sharing his deepest inner feelings with an audience of sympathetic souls, Joel has always defiantly, and sometimes arrogantly, kept his distance. His theatrical flair, fondness for classic song structure, and penchant for styling his vocals to suit the characters he sings about all have roots in a tradition that stretches beyond rock and roll to the formal artifice of Tin Pan Alley and Broadway. Where the masks leave off and the man begins is probably no easier for Joel himself to determine than it is for his listeners. As he did on his 1977 LP, The Stranger, Joel makes this dramatic tension part of The Bridge. You swore to yourself a long time ago there were some things that people never needed to know, Joel sings, on the edgy Code of Silence, the last song he wrote for The Bridge. As Cyndi Lauper, who earned the first co-writing credit in Joel's career for helping him through the composer's block that gripped him when he started to write the tune, wails in and out of the vocal harmony, Joel wonders, isn't that a kind of madness to be living by a code of silence when you've really got a lot to say? The message of emotional liberation in Code of Silence echoes the theme of the grinding guitar rocker A Matter of Trust, where Joel posits the virtue of trust as preventative medicine for the sort of love that, quote, is just a lie of the soul, a constant battle for the ultimate state of control. A steady movement from polished rockers to full-blooded ballads sets the musical rhythm of The Bridge, while the lyric concerns of the LP fluctuate between the lust for control and the simultaneous desire to give it up and gain the sustaining warmth of love. In the elegant ballad Temptation, the singer weighs the demands of business and the opinions of friends. They're afraid that I'm losing my touch. There's a danger in wanting too much. Against the romance of family life. The frantic self-enclosure depicted in the LP's opener, Running on Ice, where the racing pulse of Joel's piano perfectly captures, quote, city life anxiety, is jolted into perspective by the swelling chorus of This Is the Time, with its reminder that amid the hubbub of urban days, life is passing. This is the time to remember, 'cause it will not last forever. These are the days to hold on to, 'cause we won't, although we'll want to. Both the male singer intimidated by the upscale modern woman in the peppy single from the Ruthless People's soundtrack, and the touchingly affected hero of Big Man on Mulberry Street, skirt the borders of self-awareness, realizing the trap their old-fashioned attitudes have become, but not fully prepared to give up the isolated safety they provide. And in the introverted melancholy blues of Baby Grand, Joel and Ray Charles, who turns in an impressively genuine performance, share a vocal and piano duet that dramatizes 2 veteran saloon entertainers reflecting on the music that is their solace in life. The Bridge's culmination occurs in the rollicking Getting Closer, where Steve Winwood jams on organ as Joel concludes, I have not lost faith in the things I believe, and if I don't have this all worked out, still I'm getting closer, getting closer. The tentativeness of this resolution, lifted into optimism by the song's upbeat, traffic-like swing, suggests an adult version of life as a continuing quest for self-knowledge, a much less contentious and more satisfying view of the world than Joel has articulated in the past. It's appropriate that Joel has chosen to call this album The Bridge, a title that evokes the emotional ties the LP stresses and the term for the musical passage that gives songs their shape. The album's formal simplicity allows its meanings to emerge in a natural, unpretentious way. The result is a smart, sophisticated collection of songs that seemingly brings us closer to Billy Joel than we've ever been before, and leaves us with a pleasant sense of expectation about the bridges we'll be crossing with him in the future.
Actually, a solid review.
Yeah, pretty good. I mean, very analytic, certainly.
Yeah.
There's a cynical part of me that wonders if Columbia didn't, buy enough high-priced ads to
Right.
to get somebody to shave off any parts that they didn't like, or go glowing. I mean, it's like I said, it's not glowing. He gets into the analytics of it, but he actually doesn't say too much about whether or not he thinks it's a good record.
It's more of a deeper description of the record than an opinion.
I appreciate that he mentions that Joel doesn't, reveal as much as other songwriters or singer-songwriters, but understands that, when Billy's reaching back to Tin Pan Alley and Broadway, nobody thought Tony Bennett or Frank Sinatra were bearing their intimate details of their lives. Nobody thought Cole Porter was writing an autobiography.
So as we mentioned, that was the original review of the album, September 11th, 1986. And so now we're going to fast forward considerably for a ultimate classic rock retrospective on the album, which was published July 29th, 2016, so 30 years after the album came out. And this one's by Jeff Giles. Billy Joel entered the mid-80s riding a professional high with his hugely popular And Innocent Man album, all while contemplating whether he even wanted to continue his recording career. Joel's problem, so to speak, was a nice one to have. In March 1985, he married his girlfriend, supermodel Christy Brinkley. Their daughter, Alexa Ray, was born that December. At that point, the Innocent Man album, recorded in part as a Valentine to Brinkley during their courtship, was over 2 years old. He'd extended his hiatus with the release of a stopgap greatest hits collection, but it was time to get back to work. With domestic bliss beckoning, he really didn't want to. It knocked me sideways, Joel admitted years later. I had a difficult time writing, a difficult time touring. I didn't have a father when I was growing up, and I wanted to be a father. This was my opportunity. Complicating matters further was the fraying bond between Joel and his bandmates. More than many solo performers, he'd long operated as a musician among Confederates. While they weren't necessarily his equals in the group, they had been a crucial component of his early success, helping him translate his live act's energy into a studio setting. From 1976's Turnstiles onward, he'd worked with the same core crew, including producer Phil Ramone, who'd helmed the vast majority of Joel's biggest hits. But as he entered the studio in 1985, he could feel things changing. It got to the point it became such a big business what we were doing, Joel said. We did arena tour after arena tour, and rather than be friends like we used to be, we became business associates. People would kvetch about money and their deal, and we weren't close. Everybody was looking in everyone else's pocket, Joel told Newsday. It came to a head. We weren't having fun. It just wasn't fun. Personally and professionally, Joel understood he was undergoing a metamorphosis. I knew that this album was going to be a transitional album, he observed. That's the purpose it served. It bridged the gap. The end result of all this conflict, which Joel naturally titled The Bridge, arrived in stores on July 29th, 1986. In some retrospects, it retained the form and function of a classic Billy Joel record. It wasn't hard to hear. In some respects, it retained the form and function of a classic Billy Joel record. It wasn't hard to hear the strain between the scenes. From the first time in a while, Joel sounded like he was reaching, and not always in a good way. Joel records like Turnstiles and The Stranger were willfully eclectic, but they sounded like the work of a guy whose restlessness pushed him to explore. In contrast, The Bridge sounded like a bit of a hodgepodge. On one hand, the record's disjointed feel was a product of its time, not just in the studio where Joel was working with Ramone and many of his longtime bandmates for what would end up being their final album together, but in pop music in general. He'd often lament the technological creep overtaking production in mainstream music during the 80s contemporary interviews. The bridge ended up being a virtual time capsule of its era. It was larded with instruments and production techniques that lived up to a line he belted out in the record's lead-off single, Modern Woman. After 1986, what else could be new? On the other hand, Joel himself didn't do the bridge any favors by dragging himself kicking and screaming back to work. One of the album's better tracks, Big Man on Mulberry Street, is inspired by the way he'd have to psych himself up while walking to his writing studio. Another, Temptation, is about not wanting to leave Alexa Ray. Never a prolific writer, he had to work harder than ever to assemble the track listing for this album. It definitely inspired some worthy material, but it also added up to a collection of songs that, as he put it, are not necessarily related to one another. They were written in the same time period. Of course, Even Middling Billy was a major event in 1986, and The Bridge was far from a flop. It didn't come close to replicating An Innocent Man's impact, but still broke the top 10 and went double platinum, sending a string of singles into heavy rotation. And as much as its title reflected Joel's season of change, it also pointed to the number of musical connections he made during the recording. He cut a duet with his idol Ray Charles, Baby Grand, lured Steve Winwood in for some studio jamming and a cameo, Getting Closer, and even got a last-minute songwriting and vocal assist from Cyndi Lauper on Code of Silence. In the wake of the Bridge's success, Joel would embark on a major world tour that ultimately took him to the Soviet Union for a series of dates later commemorated with a TV special and a live album. Still to be faced was the aftermath of the upheaval surrounding the sessions. On the other side loomed a period of even more profound and often painful change. I'm looking at the album and I say, oh, that's where I am. That's where I am now, Joel mused in the weeks after wrapping The Bridge, which makes me start thinking about the next thing.
Yeah, that sums up a lot of what we're hinting at here as far as what was happening with this album, what's on record and what's between the grooves, if you will.
This article had had hindsight working to its advantage, so they were able to look back on, the band changing, all of that unfolding over the years that followed, and it really, as we'll get into, shaped a lot of what took place on this album.
All right, you ready?
Let's do it.
Okay, now, Running on Ice. This didn't make the top 10 on mine, or at least not the top 5 of my album opener rankings, but I will always love that intro. For as little virtuosity as we get from Billy on this album, he just comes flying out of the gate with that piano riff.
It's just a burst of energy to start this album. For it being such a mid to late 80s album, the fact that he's opening this album going full on Police is great.
But what kills this one, in part, is the chorus. The chorus, I've never, on close listen, you realize how schmaltzy the chorus is. There's a damn good reason they used this on The Office for Michael Scott's, ill-fated movie. It's because it's just so, all of a sudden becomes like a klezmer thing for a moment. You got this really like cool, slick, frenetic, verse and goes Oompa Loompa for a minute.
Now, granted, it does pretty much follow the Police to a T in that way.
You think so?
Oh, yeah.
Spirits in the material world that was still riffy in the chorus,
It bopped a little bit more.
So here's the first time where I want to make this point about some really excellent crafted lyrics and then moments where it's not. Again, so much of this is AABB rhyme scheme, but they say this highway's going my way, but I don't know where it's taking me. I like this line, but I'm carrying the weight of all the useless junk a modern man accumulates. It really makes good work of the kind of the open vowels there. Just carrying the weight of all the useless junk. It's an interesting way of talking about emotional and or material baggage. This is the 80s. Consumerism was really peaking.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, just that I'm a cosmopolitan sophisticate of culture and intelligence. Like that's just fantastic. That's great. As the Stones would say, vowel movement, So he's slapping out like all these great like frenetic lines with these inventive phonetics to them and everything else. And then we get, as fast as I can climb a new disaster every time I turn around. As soon as I get one fire put out, all of a sudden the metaphors are getting mixed and there's a highway in the next stanza, it just seems like he ran out of steam after 2 verses. And you feel like he just slapdashed the last one together.
And then the chorus lyrics just are cheese.
You wonder what would have happened if he took another 2 months or something on this one. For as much as we know that he would, shelve something and bring it out 3 albums later, I think this is really a sign that he just wanted this done because he didn't take that verse and say, this is good, but I don't have the rest of it yet. I'm going to wait.
Now, typically, you had guys like Liberty who would be the guy to be like, this ain't up to snuff here, work on it. I felt like a little more of that got through on this album. Maybe it was because, there was a lot of tension, no pun intended, within the band at this point.
That's a good point. I didn't consider it that way, that, Liberty may have been stepping back a little on this.
If the relationship started going more of a business relationship, that personal sounding board might have kind of cut itself off at some point. Or, there's so many people involved in the camp now, it's like, oh, if I say the wrong thing, I'm going to get canned. I was listening to this song through headphones, and one thing that caught my ear was the bass in the intro and the verses. I couldn't tell if it was a fretless or a synth bass. Now, you had Rob Mounsey doing additional synthesizers, so it's very possible that the verses had a synth bass going on. But when you get into the choruses, you really hear the driving like electric bass that Doug brings to the table.
Right.
But I couldn't quite tell if what was going on in the verses. The bass was certainly different.
What about it? Did it feel like it was sliding or did it feel like a softer attack?
A little of both. Yeah, it had that sliding thing a little bit, which gave me the fretless, vision in my head. It's just something I could have also heard somebody playing on a keyboard because I think it was just quarter notes.
This occurs to me now, too. When you look at where Rob Mounsey comes in on orchestration and things like that, I really wonder if he was an after-the-fact kind of addition to these songs. There are a lot of those kicky synth parts that recall the idea that you might have with a big band, with a horn section. And the songs survive without them. They don't hang on those parts. It's all color. So I wonder if he was brought in later on in the process where a lot of the skeletons of these songs were done and all of a sudden he's coming in and, if he wasn't completely involved on some of them, maybe like Running on Ice, they were like, hey, this one needs a little something.
I mean, I don't know that for sure, but audio-wise, it seems like that's the case, that a lot of those bells and whistles and ear candy was long after the basic tracks were cut for this. Now we're going to go to Jack's favorite song. This is the time.
Smooth jazz. What frustrates me about this one is how damn underdeveloped the lyrics are. I could have excused how schmaltzy the production is on this if he had come through lyrically. And he just doesn't. And I remember this one when I was a kid. I didn't listen to the ballads a lot, but there was something very sentimental and very bittersweet about this one that I keyed into. But it just doesn't hold up. Now here's the problem. Well, first of all, I want to mention that we have a quick appearance of Billy the Scoundrel. This sort of Billy Joel character that loves to talk about, how he's a screw up and he does this and that, but hey, this girl loves me anyway. We get that, that before you came into my life, some kind of miracle that I survived. Here's the thing, and I've mentioned before, this one is the one that really sounds like he had a couple index cards with lyrics on them and just said, F it, I'm throwing them together. You got this beach, you got them in the house, and these things they don't mesh. What really got me this time was when I keyed into the line, but I don't want to lose you now. It seems as if at some point he or someone else didn't want this to be just a flat love song, and I think because he didn't have anything to say. He just hodgepodges these images together. And there's passage of time and things like this. And it sounds like, once again, if he had given more time to it, I think that line would have turned the lyrics, would have developed into this thing where you realize so much more, that he's not just reminiscing with this woman that he's with, because that's what most of it feels like. Even when it's sometimes, the day goes by without even seeing each other at all. To me, that was always a young couple. Just we're so busy, we're doing this and that. He just throws it in and he doesn't do anything with it. And I think if he had, this would have been a fantastic song. This would have been a subversively fantastic song.
You're absolutely right. To me, that I Don't Want to Lose You Now was the portal to depth, but he never went there. One line that really I cringe at, even just reading it, right in the first verse there. I haven't shown you everything a man can do, so stay with me, baby. I got plans for you.
He's gonna
it's like, who are you? Now I really need a shower. He took it out.
The more I read it, the more I can give it a little bit more credit and say that there's some sort of progression to the lyrics, but I still don't see it. I mean, you could say like, hey man, we're young lovers, walk on the beach, and then they're so busy, and then he doesn't want to lose her, and then they embrace again, but just, it's too flat. It doesn't, he's talking, but you know why? Okay, here's the other damn problem with it. He's talking about a moment, right? This is the time to remember, which makes you think he's trying to like crystallize this tiny little sliver of life, but then in the verses, he's covering way too much ground. Sort of thematic dissonance all over this thing.
And it's a shame too, because I like the music. I love David Brown's guitar work. It is some of the tastiest guitar parts that he's ever put on a Billy Joel record, I think.
It really is.
Oh gosh, David Brown. I'd love to see him play that again.
Yeah.
And I also do really like the guitar work on the chorus. There's a couple layered electric guitar things going on there that just really were pleasing to my ear too.
1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4.
Matter of Trust with the quasi Springsteen. 1, 2. That intro just hangs like a fart in a room with no windows over the rest of this song.
But could you imagine it starting without it?
Once again, somebody just got through the album. Somebody didn't write a good intro. Because, live at Yankee Stadium, they tease this other intro, but he still has to punt into 1, 2, 3, 4 because the beginning of this song doesn't give him anything to work with. He would have had to go through like another round. Just the riff might have been a little different or something to get him in there.
And that's the only spot that you actually hear the piano, really. The couple opening notes right before he does the count off.
Yeah, it is a very guitar heavy song. I actually have always liked this one. Maybe it's a guilty pleasure. Maybe as I was listening to this album's kind of really a guilty pleasure. Like as much as we can disparage it, I really enjoyed myself for the most part listening to it today. This is probably the closest he gets to someone like Billy Bragg, whom I've said in the past is my favorite writer of love songs because he writes so unromantically and pragmatically that they sound like workbooks for like a good, solid relationship, real nuts and bolts. And through that nuts and bolts, you get a great appreciation for it. And that's, I think, what we see here. It's a novel idea, the emphasis on trust versus... romantic feelings versus sexual attraction versus anything else.
And this was also around the time where he was starting to have a lot of problems with people in his career that he trusted as well. I almost feel like this was a way to kind of talk about that, but paint it into it being about a relationship with a woman.
I never thought of it that way. Now that you're saying it, that makes a lot of sense. You wonder if this was connected to love or money.
Oh, Money or Love?
Money or Love, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I know Money or Love was certainly about Doug. There's certainly some of the lyrics that certainly make you say, yes, it's about a relationship with a woman, but some love is just a lie of the soul, a constant battle for the ultimate state of control. After you heard lie upon lie, there can hardly be a question of why. I mean, that could be about Frank Weber in a year or two.
But for God's sakes, don't shut me out. That's a great line. And that's the opposite of like the sort of poetic stuff I was harping about before. It's just the perfect line to encapsulate the feeling that he's having in that moment, I feel like it's such a New York thing to say. It's such an East Coast sort of. Like, he may have had to, like, change it from "for Christ's sake."
Speaking of such a New York thing, I've got this music video so ingrained in my head that as I'm listening to the album version, I'm expecting to hear that lady yell, "Shut up!" in between
Solo,
verses.
solo.
Yeah.
Yeah, green screened in and everything.
Speaking of the video real quick, you notice how he refers to the band as girls? Because he says,
First 2 chords are open fifths, second 2 chords are open fifths. Keep the same chords. Okay, girls. Matter of trust.
and then they go into it. There's a tiny little Spinal Tap joke.
Oh,
in
hold
the,
on,
video.
hold on. 11, right?
Yeah, somebody says to Billy, "Hey, your amp's only on 10." And he's like, "What? Do we have an 11 button?"
Does it have we have an 11 button?
1, 2, oh, 1, 2, 3, 4.
Hold it. It's too hot in here. Wait, it's too hot. Can you guys open the windows?
I'd like to see somebody take another crack at this one, really.
It's a great song. I love the groove. I love, David and Russell to me were such a great guitar pair in this band. They played off of each other so well, and this is a great example of it. The guitar work is understated but so nice. The guitar solo is great from David. Here's another bridge I love too. And the guitar work underneath it in the bridge is fantastic as well.
I think it suffers a little from becoming sort of 80s dad rock, in that sort of Phil Collins, Eric Clapton, even Stevie Winwood to a lesser degree kind of way, where these guys were like, we're 40 and proud of it, like they were like very okay with becoming middle of the road. And you get a little bit of that, here, and I think that's what sinks it a little.
Well, and I also think that that's just the kind of records that Phil Ramone produced. Think about it, 3 years later you had Stormfront, produced by Mick Jones, the guitar player from Foreigner, a big guitar-heavy band. So guess what happened on that record? Big guitars out front. Mm-hmm. That sounded like a rock band more. So now we're going to go to what I feel is the biggest 1980s time capsule on the record.
Oh, yeah.
And that's Modern Woman. This is a curious song. The horn keyboard stabs really date it to me. The Simmons drums that you hear over top. I think there's some electronic drums sampled in there too.
Yeah, that big chorus, like a real simple yet effective melody.
There's a version on that documentary Building the Bridge, which is the EPK for this album, where it shows a take of Billy and the band recording this. A much more stripped down, organic take of it. And it sounds a lot more interesting to me, honestly.
I gotta rewatch that.
And it's so buried on the bridge version, but on this studio take, there is a lot going on the piano that you don't even hear on the final mix.
1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. You see her sitting with a coffee and a paper with a high top of sneakers of Italian design. With a long cool stare, she aggravates attention, makes up her face while she makes up her mind. Now you're in trouble, baby, she's an intellectual. What if she figures out you're not very smart? Maybe she's the quiet type or into heavy metal. Boy, you got to get it settled. She's breaking your...
I made a note that, is this a conceptual cousin to This Is the Time? Because it kind of like goes through that time span, and there's that sort of insecurity in the relationship in this thing. There's a thread that runs through some of Billy's songs, and I'm going to put on my shoddy amateur psychologist hat, right? And talk about possible abandonment issues, which, as we heard in that Ultimate Classic Rock recap, he was very conscious of that when Alexa was born. He didn't grow up with a father. He didn't want that for his daughter.
My daughter had been born at the end of 1985, and that completely changed my life. It knocked me sideways. It almost stopped me from wanting to be a road musician anymore. I didn't want to leave. I wanted to be with my baby. I wanted to be with my little girl. And I had a difficult time writing, a difficult time touring. More than anything, I didn't have a father when I was growing up, and I wanted to be a father. And this was my opportunity. There's a song on here called Temptation, which people think is about a man talking about a woman. This is actually me talking about not wanting to leave my baby.
There's 2 on this album, which makes sense. Well, actually 3, I guess, is This Is the Time, Modern Woman, and Temptation, where there's talk of leaving the house in the morning, and there's conflict about it. The point where in This Is the Time, it's easy to go let a day slip on by without seeing each other. But I'm going to say that stretches all the way back to Until the Night. I never ask you where you go when I leave you in the morning. He's really fixated on what happens when somebody leaves the house. Are they going to come back? But like, it's that hint of it being on an album before that, you know? It has to crop up somewhere else, even if I can't think of it right this second.
Even if it's just in passing in a line.
Yeah, well, that's
somewhere.
the thing. It's always in passing. It's something that slips through.
It's something that he doesn't fixate on, but it's always there in the back of his mind.
Yeah, the song never relies on it. It's
Right.
a detail that he slips in as a motif.
And maybe on this album, that whole thing started bubbling to the top more because he saw his childhood happening again. He did not want that for Alexa.
I mean, that's a powerful thing. You know, when you have a kid, you get older and you realize that your template is what you had. And it happens in weird ways that, you know, you don't realize that you're working off your template. I always thought of it as times in retrospect where I was like, oh, there's more than one way this can play out. You know, like something would happen, good or bad, and you'd be like, well, clearly, yeah, that's how this goes. You know, or if there's you do something different, you're like, no, that's not how it goes. And you have to sit back and say, well, according to what? Like my one experience, you know, like my one instance.
Right.
Yeah. Well, I bummed myself out.
We've officially bottomed out.
So let's go into the most melancholy song on the album then.
It's certainly a puzzling sequence, this album.
There's no narrative through line here at all.
It doesn't take you on any specific journey. To go out of Modern Woman into Baby Grand is pretty jarring. To me, this is Billy's standard of the 1980s.
You wonder if he thought about this as possibly being his next New York state of mind.
That's where my head went.
You know what? It's pleasant. I never liked it as a kid. I listened to it today. I'm like, it's not bad. You know, I'm not going to go out of my way, but I didn't start checking my phone in the middle of it either. So I do love the line, and I've got scars from those dives I played in. That's great.
That's a great line. I love Ray's voice on this. His voice is just like butter to me. Production-wise, I like how they had Billy and Ray's pianos panned, which you don't necessarily pick up through a stereo, but on the headphones. If I had to guess, I'd say Billy is panned left and Ray is panned right. But it allows you to hear them playing off of each other a little more because it gives just enough of the separation
Yeah.
to where you can hear it going back and forth, you know?
You know, it just occurred to me in the video, there's a couple of ad-libs from Ray that I don't think are in the studio version.
What? I don't believe it.
I don't believe that. So we flip the record. We stay on the jazz track. Now we get Big Man on Mulberry Street. Man, I always love this song. I love the lyrics. This is the schlub anthem. This is Billy at peak schlubliness. God, what's the movie with Al Pacino? Right? That's all I need to say. Just pick one. I wonder
take
if you
your
can
pick.
figure out which one I'm getting at. Because I can't think. I want to say Carlito's Way, and it's not Carlito's Way. Donnie Brasco. Fugazi. Like, that's the guy. Like, if you can't figure out what's going on in Big Man on Mulberry Street, freaking go download Donnie Brasco and watch it. What? Download Donnie Brasco anyway. It'll do you a world of good.
You know, this song for me feels, I love the song, but this recording feels a little sterile to me.
I'm going to disagree with you. I know what you're getting at, but I think it works here. It's such an artifice character. Like, the character knows he's full of shit, so it kind of makes sense that it sounds a little canned. I'm sure that wasn't the idea, but I think it kind of works. Liberty's fake Purdy Shuffle is, you know what's great about the way he played? I just assumed that he played this two-handed on the hi-hat. It really opens the groove. It gives, picture this guy strutting down Mulberry Street. It gives him a wider gait.
The one thing I miss about this between the live version is, you know, on the bridge tour, he would like really unload, like between the verses, like do the screaming.
Yeah.
And I know it was just ripping up his voice, but I loved it.
You know what? This one I wrote down. This here's what we call a toe tap. Like, I'm sitting there with my record, reading the lyrics, and I look down and my left foot's tapping.
Okay.
Like, didn't even realize.
Yeah, it's a toe tap.
It's right there, man. It definitely is. Now, the bridge on this. So this one's the one with Ron Carter. And you know, it's funny, in my memory, I remember most of the song having horns, and if the horns are on the whole thing, they are buried underneath the synth. But I think the horns are just in the middle, you know, on that bridge.
And I'm going to go as far to say is the bridge is a different recording.
Oh, yeah. Well, this is the one I was alluding to before, that when it's on record on the original pressing or so, I don't know if I have an original, but I certainly have a contemporaneous pressing, there's an audible change in the tone and the quality of it.
Going back, like coming out of it is where it's so noticeable. If you're listening for it, it's jarring, and yeah, it's absolutely a completely different recording. And well, there you go. I mean, it's a different bass player. It's different players. It appears that Liberty's playing brushes on it, but you know, it's a totally different recording that they just stitched together.
I mean, I understand why Vinnie Colaiuta did Baby Grant, because Vinnie Colaiuta is just a session guy, even for all the acrobatics that he's certainly capable of. But wow, getting Ron Carter to play a relatively simple walking bass line, I'd love to know the history behind that. Because here's the thing, we know Doug could do it, because Doug did Zanzibar. So what happened here?
However, though, Doug wasn't an upright player.
That's true.
He got that electric upright specifically for the bridge tour and learned it. But prior, he wasn't an upright player.
Maybe they also did it after the fact because it was a situation where somebody was like, this song needs something. And maybe Phil or someone else was like, I got an idea. Call these guys in. We're gonna do one of these.
That's certainly possible. And look, Doug didn't play on Getting Closer. This is the album with the least involvement from Doug. He may have not wanted to do it, or he may have just not been around as much, or who knows.
Temptation. Sadly half-baked. So close. So close.
So what say you about it? Because I don't know. I've always dug this one.
Oh, I like it. It's another one I feel like it almost doesn't stand up on a close listen. Reading the numbers on a boxcar, song's great. A little dated in the production, that's fine. Anybody can redo this song today and take care of that problem, just playing it straight.
Yeah, it's that 1980s Peter Cetera keyboard.
Yeah, it's a keyboard, and Mark does a great job on it, but Mark played an 80s saxophone, for sure.
For sure.
This is another one where it's based around a conflict, but I feel like there's a sense of a conflict that was inserted into it. Like, okay, this part here, I lose my composure, I could use some restraint, I never claimed to be a hero, and I never said I was a saint. Like, why is he flying off the wall all of a sudden? Why are we getting Angry Billy in the middle of this? Like, this is the same, like, now this worked beautifully in An Innocent Man, where he's pleading with this girl and he finally loses his temper and, you know, metaphorically slams his hand on the table, you know, in the bridge, and then it goes silent again, and it's a great cinematic moment. It feels like he's trying to do the same thing here, but, like, it's a sad song. There's nothing angry about it. He's not arguing. It doesn't make sense that he's losing his temper. He's not feeling pressure. You know what I mean? In Running on Ice, yeah, I know, I caught myself. But, you know, in Running on Ice, he's freaking wound up and he's gonna crack. And yeah, so that's where he could use some, you know, restraint and, you know, you know, there's all this pressure on me. I never said I was perfect. Frick, you know, I could see that. But not in this one. Just doesn't work. He seems to like making me act this way, and I know what all my friends say. Like, you know what the problem with that is? That's either a woman or the music business, and we know it's not a woman. And the music business is too alienating, so it doesn't work. It's just you end up in no man's land. Aha! I wonder if that part I could, you know, I lose my composure, use some restraint. Imagine if that somehow got interpolated into Running on Ice somewhere. You know, certainly not in the same treatment, but like that sentiment belonged there.
I can agree with that. There is an alternate version of this song.
It's fast.
Yeah, it's the same lyrics, but a totally different groove, feel, everything, and it's much faster. Actually, you know what? Let's play a clip of it here. It's pretty different.
1, 2, 3, 4. Such a temptation, it's driving me crazy, and it's my fascination, it's making me act this way. but she's such a temptation.
Sounds like an outtake from An Innocent Man.
It's totally Innocent Manny.
That's like somewhere between An Innocent Man and Oliver and Company.
Makes you appreciate the album version more, though, I'll tell you that.
I want to say I'd love to see somebody redo this now, but somebody also would have to like tinker with the lyrics, and I don't think it's a line edit problem. I think you have to do a little bit of overhauling. You got to knock down a couple walls and redo the plumbing.
This one has no guitar, I don't think.
No, it doesn't.
This is one I liked through headphones. I actually like the drums and the bass, the way they work around the keyboard on it. This is another one where it's hard to say if there's a fretless bass going on as well. Doug is credited as bass, so this may be a fretless bass situation too. Because you can feel the bass modulate more than a typical bass on this. So next up, we've got the third song on side 2, and if you're keeping score, this is song number 8 of 9. And that is Code of Silence with Cyndi Lauper.
You know who the unsung hero of this song is?
Who?
Liberty. That is a simple yet monster groove he's playing. He is like swinging for the fences there, and he's getting them over. In my limited capacity in the studio, I can tell you that there are songs where they put the drums in a big room and your job is to fill the air, you know. And that's what he does here. And this really comes out on the vinyl, where you can hear the room a lot better on the record. Like, he's not doing a lot there, but he is expertly filling the room with just the right amount of muscle and groove, and that sound is blossoming. You know, I've said before, he could play kind of like Bonham in terms of a groove. He's got a killer right foot, but because there's so many more instruments in Billy Joel's band than Zeppelin, they thin out his sound a lot. But this is an example where he really comes through, and that underlying groove does a lot for this song.
It's funny you mentioned that, because I wrote how big and out front Liberty's drums are, as well as the acoustic guitars. So much so that they both kind of reminded me of something that would have fit on the Nylon Curtain. That album has a big drum production as well. The acoustic guitars are pretty prevalent along that album. I think the one I'm thinking of in particular is Surprises.
What do you think of the lyrics on this one?
Lyrically, I'm not huge on the verses, but I love the chorus lyrics.
Am I dense? Do you get this song? I never got this song. And probably on my bad, you know, it's my shortcoming, not the lyrics. But like, I just never got a piece of this for anything. I couldn't even like get the tip of the iceberg. Like, it just seems so idiosyncratic to me.
Is it more like, you know, he feels like he wants to say something about a situation, but ultimately feels like it's not going to help, so he's choosing silence? I don't know. It's, you know, I never analyzed it this much lyrically. Yeah, what does it mean?
I mean, I agree with you on that, but it's just so overblown. It's just so overdramatic. Like, oh, I have a code of silence. No, it's like something's been like eating at this guy for years. I came up with a pet theory today.
Okay.
I think it's about alcoholism.
Oh.
So read the lyrics through this lens. He wants to take a drink, but he can't. He knows what'll happen if he does. So it's not like he's being quiet, he's abstaining. It's a song about abstaining from something that you want to do, but you have a code that's telling you can't.
Interesting.
Like, imagine him not being about like trying to like spill the beans about something. Imagine him like, or imagine the character staring at a glass of whiskey, like wanting it, but like reminding himself that he's not allowed to do it.
Or on the flip side, it's a situation like that, but he feels like he can't talk to people about it, even though he really wants to. He's afraid to share what he's struggling with. I tell you, Cindy's vocal harmonies with Billy are great.
Yeah, that's an unlikely but very effective pair.
You know, she does her thing, but doesn't get in the way of what Billy's doing. And again, Billy comes back with another great bridge, in my opinion.
This sort of has the opposite problem, I think, lyrically in a way than This Is the Time, whereas This Is the Time was like all setting and not enough conflict, and this is like all conflict, no setting. Like, that's the thing, like, you can't get a frame of reference for what's going on. You have nothing to hang on, like, what's the problem here? You know what I mean? Do you have some deep, dark secret? Are you in an argument with your girl? Are you in an argument with your friend? You know what I mean?
What is this code of silence? What's the situation?
Yeah, like saying code of silence is way too specific. You got to give me a setting to put this around.
Interesting that, you know, she helped him write this and Sounds like helped with some of the lyrics, and certainly not her style. But whatever they cooked up together, they pulled something interesting out. Billy went on to return the favor too on Cindy's record.
Yeah, which one was that?
So it was on the True Colors album, which also came out in '86. Billy sang backing vocals on the song Maybe He'll Know. It kicks in with this like doo-wop thing, and it's Billy singing like all these doo-wop backing vocals, which is kind of interesting.
So coming off that one is the closer, track number 9, a very obscure one, Getting Closer. And as I said recently, I wish they opened with this one.
Yeah.
So cracks me up every time. Because you know exactly, he's really talking about Artie Rip here, and I think it's just the fact that he puts it at the end of the last album Artie's going to get a piece of, and just tells him what it is,
Oh, yeah, totally. I didn't even think of that. He would have known that this was the last record that Artie got a piece of.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, maybe this was a parting FU to him.
Oh, yeah. Oh, dude, these lyrics are like, Bob Dylan grew up on Long Island. Like, this is what he would be coming up with.
Right.
I'm a mark for every shyster from Topanga to Berlin. Like, the comment on their acrobats, that's like classic Dylan,
Oh, yeah. I love that Steve Winwood is a guest on this, but in such an understated way. He's got such a signature voice and is a great singer, but Billy would be, Billy being Billy, it's like, man, it'd be fun to just have him come jam on this.
Yeah, well, wasn't part of it like he needed a song and they just kind of wrote it as they went?
I feel like it.
It would clue us in a little more if we did a close listen to the drums.
Yeah.
Because, Liberty plays slightly differently when he knows what the lyrics are. And so if they put this down, it'd be really subjective, but if you feel like it doesn't have that usual lock, that would be why.
Maybe they had just the very bare bones of it, but, it was fleshed out that day.
Yeah, see, this one's it's smooth all the way through. It doesn't have that problem that Running on Ice had, where all of a sudden you get this clunker stanza. And this goes in that category I wrote about a couple months ago about songs about rock stars that should not be relatable, but they are.
Yeah.
Because even though like what they're talking about is so alien to us, like they've reached down and they've gotten to the primal core of it,
Right.
I put in like Albuquerque by Neil Young, Rocket Man by Elton John, and what was the Joni Mitchell one I went with? Oh, Free Man in Paris. All talking about like touring and like, jet setting and this and that, and it works. And this one, he's talking about getting ripped off for like millions of dollars, but still having millions of dollars, but being like, but that was my millions of dollars, not because I need the $1 million, but it's not your $1 million. It's such an aloof song, and that's what makes it so good. Like, he didn't come flying out the gate. The song is not called, Artie Rip Drop Dead. Yeah.
Oh, so I take it you didn't play it backwards?
No, yeah. Yeah, if you play it backwards, he says, go fuck yourself.
Right.
So to every bank in Switzerland that stores my stolen youth. That's such a breezy line.
But when you read it just on its own like that, it's like, damn.
I mean, I'm never crazy about that, but they haven't taken everything those paybacks are a bitch. Like, that's a little
That line could have been a little better.
I took the part that was, if I could go back and start over somehow, I would not change that much knowing what I know now. If this song came out 6 years ago, we would have seen that in the meme misattributed to Marilyn Monroe.
Made me think, this seems like a parting FU to Artie Rip, and him finally getting some resolution, and like, it's over, I'm getting closer to being me again, it's finally over. And this was just on the heels of all the Frank Weber shit. When you think about it, I feel awful for him. I mean, Stormfront Tour was basically to climb out of debt from Weber.
Right.
So you think the bridge happens, he's finally free and clear, and, it's time for, celebration, only to realize that, his manager the last 6 years, has been swindling him, and just when he thinks he's free, he's hundreds of millions of dollars in debt. They have Steve Winwood here playing as a guest musician, but vocally, Billy is doing his best Steve Winwood.
Yeah.
With him in the room.
Yeah, and yeah, Billy just gravitates towards it. I like in the EPK when Liberty's going nuts over this. I was like, please, he knows all the traffic records. He knows all the mistakes on the traffic records.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Actually, the story about this Steve Winwood session is so good. I think we should play a little clip here.
There's a song that was done with Steve Winwood playing the Hammond organ. And I've always admired Steve Winwood for years and years. And we got him to play on one of the records. So there's another bridge. Came in and we played about 6 hours of Traffic, Spencer Davis, Blind Faith, blues songs, all his stuff, all that he probably hadn't played in years. And he was just having a blast. He was singing and playing the organ, and he'd pick up the bass and played the bass. And we know those records cold. I mean, my drummer even knows the mistakes that the drummer made on his record. And as a matter of fact, in my drummer's yearbook, I think it's 1969, his high school yearbook, there's a little blurb from one of Liberty's friends. It says, "Dear Lib, keep practicing the drums, and one of these days you'll get to play with Steve Winwood." And Liberty brought the yearbook in to show Steve Winwood. I said, but don't show him till the session's over.
And you'll be amazed at the gaze on their faces as they sentence you.
You know that. He knows all those licks.
Even after we cut the record Getting Closer, we kept playing for another couple of hours. And he was having fun, and we were having fun, and I think it made the record work really well.
And that wraps up the bridge. I am curious to know what people think of this album. I want to know, if you could all indulge me, I'd love to know what people thought of this one in the moment coming out and what they think of it now. So, the person that bought it in 86, what did you think of it then? What do you think of it almost 40 years later?
Yeah, did you feel the tension and the frayed ends that were going on around this time? Did the album feel a little disjointed to you? Did it just feel like another Billy Joel record? And, you're hearing the songs on the radio, and were you just glad, like many of us were, to have something new? I was 6 when this came out. I certainly didn't have a headspace for anything that deep. I was just like, oh, awesome new Billy Joel music. And frankly, I was still discovering some of the early 70s stuff at that time too. I had hopped on with Glass Houses and followed along the ride throughout the 80s, but as the 80s went along, I was starting to go back more and more. This was the one album that I think I was conscious of right when it came out. An Innocent Man, I was only 3.
It occurs to me that this hyper-modern, at the time, or hyper-contemporary album comes out right after he puts out 2 retro albums. So Glass Houses was fairly contemporary, certainly wasn't as sleek as New Wave, but pointing to it. Then he reaches back to the 60s and 50s.
It's funny how this record feels a little more dated than An Innocent Man. That record, even though it was rooted and inspired by the 50s and 60s, it feels more timeless than The Bridge.
Possibly because it was made retro instead of being contemporary, but that's true. Yeah, you didn't listen to An Innocent Man and immediately go like, oh wow, did this come out in the 50s somehow? But you listen to this and yep, that's the 80s. I can feel Ronald Reagan breathing down my neck. That's how 80s this is. Yeah, let us know what you think of this one. What did you think of it when it came out? What do you think of it now? glasshousespodcast@gmail.com. Find us on Ye Old Socials, Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter.
And I tell you what, everyone, you guys have been killing it with the 5-star reviews and ratings and everything like that on Apple Podcasts. We are growing exponentially thanks to you all. And, if you haven't had a chance to do that, please keep it coming. But I've noticed quite a jump in recent months, and it's all because of you guys. And we can't thank you enough for all these awesome emails and your stories, and you help us fill in so many of the gaps in these episodes that you guys are helping tell the Billy Joel story too, and we're glad to have you.
Yeah, thank you guys so much. Do we have like a snappy quote from the album that we can use to walk us out? No.
No.
Everybody just go on YouTube or put on your record. Just play Getting Closer with us. There we go.
And if we don't have this ending all worked out, we're getting closer.
I'll take it. See you later.
See you guys. Thanks.